Hello and welcome to another teeny tiny, cute, adorable episode of The Tiny Tennis. I'm your host, Nick Emel. If you're new here, The Tiny Tennis is a monthly series from Tennis Podcast where we take a break from our typical long-form weekly episodes and instead cover top 10 lists in about 10 minutes or less. Real quick programming note, you may notice this episode came out on Sunday instead of the usual Monday. Well, that's because there's been a schedule shift. Going forward, our main weekly episodes will drop on Tuesdays instead of Wednesdays. Therefore, the monthly Tiny Tennis episode will now drop a day earlier as well on the first Sunday of every month. And of course, if you're listening to me now as a Tennis Pod Plus member, you are listening to this episode even earlier than that and with no ads. If you're interested in joining them and becoming a Tennis Pod Plus member, it's available on both Patreon and right inside the Apple Podcast app. See the links in the show notes for more info. Now, let's get down to business. Today we're going to help you decide which new language you'd like to learn, or maybe better put, which languages you'll never be able to learn because, like me, you are not smart enough or patient enough to learn them. Today we're going to talk about the top 10 languages that English speakers find most difficult to learn. But first, let's take a big old step back and talk about the origins and history of language itself. Now, theories about the origin of language differ because language emerged in the early prehistory of man. Before the existence of any written records, its early development has left no historical traces, and it is believed that no comparable processes can be observed today, at least not until time travel is invented. And I hear that's coming any day now. Some scholars assume the development of primitive language-like systems as early as Homo habilis, about 2 million years ago, and in the development of language proper, as we know it today, with anatomically modern Homo sapiens, which was less than about 100,000 years ago. Estimates of the number of human languages in the world vary between 5,000 and 7,000. That's crazy to me. Academic consensus holds that between 50 and 90% of languages spoken at the beginning of the 21st century will probably be extinct by the year 2100. So, god damn, I didn't realize that. So, about 100 years after the start of the 21st century, at least 50% and maybe as much as 90% of languages spoken today will be no more. They'll be extinct. While humans have the ability to learn any language, they only do so if they grow up in an environment in which the language exists and is used by others. And in fact, children learning a second language are more likely to achieve native-like fluency than adults, but in general, it is very rare for someone speaking a second language to pass completely for a native speaker. And that brings us to today, English-speaking people learning a second language. English is the most spoken language in the world, with 1.5 billion English speakers as of 2023. That's about 20% of the global population. And this comes despite only about 360 million people being native English speakers, which is indicative of English being the most learned second language in the world. And if you're wondering, native English speakers are more bilingual than I would have guessed. You're always hearing about how Americans are dumb because they don't know as many languages as most people in other countries, and while that's true, the percentage is higher than I thought. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, they estimate that about 20% of Americans can speak 2 or more languages. And that compares to about 36% in the United Kingdom, for example. Speaking of second languages, Preply reports that around 43% of the people in the world are bilingual, with a further 17% being multilingual. They can speak 3 or more languages. Fucking nerds, am I right? This means that more than half of the world's population can speak more than one language fluently. Not this podcast host. But which language is the most challenging for a native English speaker to learn? We're going to get to that list right now. This list comes from Shiksha, a study abroad website, who has compiled the top 10 most difficult languages for English-speaking people to learn. These are ranked based on the number of estimated learning hours it would take to become proficient in that language. And at the end of this episode, I'll also quickly go over the easiest languages to learn. One last note is, in addition to Shiksha, I hope I'm saying that right, probably not, I also pulled some stats from Babbel.com, BayanTech.com, and our friends at Wikipedia. Let's get to it. The top 10 most difficult languages. Number 10 is Icelandic. Part of the reason for this is there's only about 350,000 speakers of Icelandic in the world, which is by far the lowest number of speakers for a language in this top 10 list. Some things that make Icelandic so difficult for a native English speaker to learn is that Icelandic developed independently due to centuries of isolation from other Scandinavian languages, so it's even pretty unique from other languages in the region. Next, at number 9 is Russian. With 258 million speakers in the world today, Russians omit the verb to be in the present tense, which can throw beginners for a loop when they try to form basic sentences. In Russian, quote, I am a student would simply translate to, quote, I student. I think Kevin Malone from The Office would do well in Russia.
So me think, why waste time? Say lot word when few word do trick.
Number 8 is Finnish. With just over 5 million speakers in the world today, Finnish is a phonetic language where each letter is always represented by the same sound and each sound is written with the same letter. Finnish also does not have a future tense, so the present tense is used instead. That would be confusing, I think. Number 7 is Polish. 43 million speakers. Polish words are loaded with consonants, which makes them difficult to spell and pronounce. But on the bright side, Polish does use a Latin alphabet, so the letters are much more familiar to English speakers than, say, well, some of the other languages we'll get to here in a minute. Number 6 is Cantonese. This is a Chinese language. It is a tonal language with 9 distinct tones that can change the meaning of words. Some say that Cantonese is at risk of dying out due to the Chinese government's push for Mandarin as the national language. In the United States, there are also few opportunities to learn Cantonese in high school and otherwise. Number 5 is Telugu. There are 96 million speakers here. This is the second most spoken language in India after Hindi. Let's go to the top 4 now, starting with Korean. There are 80 million Korean speakers in the world. Some consonants and vowels in Korean represent sounds that do not exist in English, which can be difficult to produce and distinguish. Starting here at number 4 and all the way through number 1, everything in the top 4, it says that would take at least 88 weeks of study to become a proficient speaker in that language. Ain't nobody got time for that. Number 3 is Japanese with 125 million speakers. Japanese has 3 different alphabets. What? Kanji, hiragana, and katakana. In a typical Japanese sentence, you'll find a mix of all 3 scripts. Why? Why are we doing this to ourselves? Just have one alphabet. Japanese has a pitch accent system where the meaning of a word can change based on the pitch patterns of its syllables. Further, Japanese typically follows a subject, object, verb, or SOV order. Korean does the same thing. So this means that the English sentence, quote, I eat sushi, would actually translate to I sushi eat in Japanese. And I sushi do not eat. Number 2, Arabic. 372 million people speak this language in the world. Arabic is written from right to left. I did not know that. No, thank you. That would be so hard to retrain my brain to. What's crazy is people that can speak Arabic and English, how in their mind they're able to go back and forth between those languages and not get mixed up. So kudos to Arabic and English speakers. Furthermore, there's 20 regional dialects for Arabic. Now we're going to go to number 1. Can I get a drum roll, please? Number 1 is Mandarin. It is a Chinese language. Chinese is one of the most widely spoken languages in the world, and there's over 955 million Mandarin speakers. I believe that's the second most spoken language in the world besides English. Instead of using letters, the Chinese language consists of thousands of characters. What? Thousands too many. You only need 26 here in English. But thousands of characters and symbols that represent specific meanings. And compared to English and other European languages that use Latin letters, memorizing all Chinese characters and their meanings can be very difficult. Well, no shit. Besides, the way characters are written is very specific with a certain stroke order and direction, which can be challenging for beginners. They say English is a hard language to learn too for non-English speakers, so I guess I can't be too harsh on these languages. Let's go back through them. It's the top 10. Number 10 is Icelandic. Number 9 is Russian. Number 8 is Finnish. Number 7 is Polish. Number 6 is Cantonese. 5 is Telugu. 4 is Korean. 3 Japanese, 2 Arabic, and 1 Mandarin. But as promised, let me talk about the easiest languages for an English-speaking person to learn. This comes from Babbel. I'm just going to do the top 5. We got Portuguese at 5. 4 is Dutch. I thought Dutch was interesting because you just don't meet a lot of English speakers that also speak Dutch, at least not here in America, where I'm at. Number 3 is Spanish. Number 2 is Swedish. And number 1, Norwegian. Interesting. Those are the 5 easiest languages to learn for an English-speaking person. Mo awidusu. That's Japanese for, we're done! We did it! We are all now more educated in languages all around the world, and we did it in just about 10-ish minutes. I'd love to know if you have picked up any of these languages as a second language, and if you agree with how difficult they are. If you're listening to me now on Spotify, you can comment directly on the episode in the Spotify app. Otherwise, hit me up on social media at 10ishpod. All the links to our social are in the show notes as well. And if you enjoyed this episode, you might enjoy a long-form episode from our archives that we did years ago. Me and the late, great Brandon Kaufman covered the top 10 most spoken languages back on episode 43. Now, I must tell you goodbye, but I will not tell you goodbye in English, because instead you can enjoy me trying to say goodbye in Polish, which is to say, do widzenia. Thanks again for listening, tiny listener, and I'll see you next month for the next edition of the Tiny Tennis.